The night was alive with the sound of screaming fans, their voices a chaotic symphony that pierced the humid Memphis air. At the heart of it all stood Elvis Presley, a lanky 20-year-old with a voice that could make even the toughest hearts melt. His eyes sparkled under the harsh stage lights, and his hip movements were so electrifying that the crowd seemed to move as one, a sea of bodies swaying to the rhythm of his music. But as the show came to a close, a sense of unease settled over the young star. The world was changing, and with it, the life he once knew. Elvis had always dreamed of a better life, one free from the poverty and struggle that had defined his childhood. Growing up in Tupelo, Mississippi, and later in Memphis, he had seen firsthand the toll that economic hardship could take on a family. His father, Vernon, worked tirelessly but was often plagued by back problems, while his mother, Gladys, did her best to keep the household running smoothly. When Elvis landed a job at Crown Electric, it seemed like a step in the right direction, but his real breakthrough came when he started making music. The money from his music royalties from Sun Records and the endless stream of concert tickets was more than he had ever imagined. Vernon and Gladys were overjoyed, and the family's financial situation improved dramatically. They moved into a modest home on Lamar Avenue, a far cry from the cramped apartment they had once called home. Elvis even bought his parents a brand new Ford Crown Victoria sedan and treated himself to a pink and white Cadillac, a symbol of his newfound success and the dreams he had always harbored. But success came with its own set of challenges. Gladys, who had always been fiercely protective of her son, found it increasingly difficult to keep an eye on him. Elvis was on the road more often, traveling to cities across the South and beyond. Even though he called home nearly every day, it wasn't enough to ease her worries. She was terrified of the dangers that lurked around every corner, from car accidents to the wild teenage girls who screamed and clawed their way to the stage, desperate for a glimpse of the boy who had stolen their hearts. Dixie, Elvis's childhood sweetheart, felt the change even more acutely. They had grown up together, sharing secrets and dreams, but as Elvis's fame grew, so did the distance between them. She saw the way the girls flocked to him, the way he flirted and laughed, and the way his personality seemed to shift when he was in the spotlight. The world of show business was glamorous, but it was also seductive, and Dixie wondered if she would ever get her Elvis back. The turning point came in March 1955, when a series of events shook the family to its core. First, Bill, Elvis's close friend and bandmate, crashed Elvis's Lincoln into the back of a truck on their way back to Memphis. Then, just 3 months later, Elvis's Cadillac caught fire on the way to a concert in Texarkana. These incidents only heightened Gladys's anxiety, and Dixie's fears became more real with each passing day. As Elvis's popularity soared, so did the attention from the media and the public. He was booked for more and more shows, and his performances became increasingly wild and unpredictable. The crowds were filled with teenage girls who screamed and fainted at his every move, and young men who resented the attention he was getting from their girlfriends. The pressure was mounting, and Elvis found himself at the center of a storm he wasn't sure he could control. Despite the chaos, Elvis continued to push forward, driven by a relentless ambition and a desire to prove himself. He joined package tours organized by Bob Neal and Jamboree Attractions, sharing the stage with country music legends like Hank Snow and Farron Young. These tours took him to cities across the South, and with each performance, his star only grew brighter. One of the most influential figures in Elvis's rise was Tom Parker, a shrewd and mysterious manager with a talent for promotion. Parker, known as Colonel Parker, had made a name for himself in the world of country music, and he saw something special in Elvis. He believed that with the right guidance, Elvis could become a national sensation, a household name that would transcend the boundaries of regional fame. As the summer of 1955 drew to a close, Elvis was on the verge of something bigger than he could have ever imagined. The world was watching, and the stage was set for a transformation that would change everything. But at what cost? The family that had supported him, the girl who loved him, and the boy who once dreamed of a better life, all were poised to be left behind as Elvis Presley stepped into the spotlight. By the end of the summer, Bob Neal was getting calls from big record labels. These companies had heard Elvis's music and seen him perform, and they were excited about what he could do. Neal, who was Elvis's manager, told them that Sam Phillips, the owner of Sun Records, wasn't interested in selling Elvis's contract. This was partly true. Sun was doing well, and Elvis's success was attracting other young musicians to the studio. But Neil knew that Sun had limits. They couldn't promote Elvis as much as the big labels could, especially in the Northeast, where Elvis could become even more popular. Colonel Tom Parker, a savvy promoter, had been pushing Neil to consider a move to a bigger label. Parker pointed out that Sun's limited reach was holding Elvis back. At first, Phillips was against the idea, but as more big labels showed interest, he started to change his mind. He realized he could make a lot of money from selling Elvis's contract. Neil and Parker worked out a deal where Neil would still be Elvis's manager, but Parker would handle the bookings and long-term planning. Neil thought this would keep him involved, but he didn't realize that Parker would eventually take full control of Elvis's career. Elvis was hesitant about leaving Sun. He felt comfortable there and appreciated how Phillips had helped him. But Neil convinced him that it was the best move for his future. Elvis's father, Vernon, also supported the idea, but his mother, Gladys, was strongly against it. She didn't trust Parker and was worried about what might happen to Elvis if he became a big star. On November 21, 1955, executives from RCA Records came to Sun Studio and bought Elvis's contract from Phillips for $35,000. This was a huge amount of money for a performer who was only known in the South. RCA gave Elvis a $5,000 bonus and a 5% royalty, and he had to record 8 songs a year for them. For Phillips, the sale was a mix of good and bad. The money helped him pay off debts and develop new talent. It also allowed him to expand Sun's reach, which helped other artists like Carl Perkins, Johnny Cash, and Jerry Lee Lewis become more popular. But he was upset that Elvis was going to a promoter like Parker, who he didn't trust. Phillips worried that Elvis's unique talents and innocence might be lost in the pursuit of fame. Elvis's move to RCA was a turning point. Parker started working hard to get Elvis more exposure. He contacted his contacts at the William Morris Agency to help get Elvis on television. Parker knew that TV was the key to making Elvis a star. By the end of December, Elvis had secured a spot on the Dorsey Brothers TV show, which would air on CBS for 4 weeks starting in January. Each appearance paid Elvis $1,250, and there was a chance for more performances. Parker and Elvis also met with RCA officials in New York to plan Elvis's first recording session with the label. The RCA team was impressed by Elvis's ambition and how quickly he understood the business, but some at RCA still had doubts. They weren't sure if Elvis could become a national star, especially since Carl Perkins's Blue Suede Shoes was becoming a big hit. The music industry was changing. Old formulas weren't working anymore, and new styles like rock and roll were gaining popularity. Elvis's unique blend of rockabilly and country was perfect for the changing times. Parker and RCA believed in Elvis, and they were determined to make him a star. Elvis was ready to take the next big step in his career. He knew what he wanted, and he was willing to work hard to achieve it. The summer of 1955 had been a turning point, and now, with Parker's help, Elvis was on his way to becoming a national sensation. The year 1955 saw a significant shift in the music industry, with rhythm and blues R&B gaining traction among white audiences. Artists like Fats Domino, Chuck Berry, and Little Richard were making waves with their dynamic and innovative sounds. Fats Domino's Ain't That a Shame became a massive hit, and Chuck Berry's Maybelline soared to the top of the R&B charts and reached No. 5 on the pop charts. Little Richard, with his wild and energetic performances, burst onto the scene with Tutti Frutti, though it didn't sell as well as Berry's hit. The Platters, a vocal group inspired by the Ink Spots, achieved crossover success with their smooth doo-wop sound, especially with their hit, The Great Pretender, which topped both the pop and R&B charts. This new music, characterized by its lively and rebellious nature, was finding a home on the playlists of disc jockeys who catered to the tastes of teenagers. One such DJ, Alan Freed, began calling this new genre rock and roll, a term that quickly caught on. Meanwhile, Elvis Presley was preparing for his first recording session with RCA in January 1956. The session, held in Nashville, included Elvis, Scotty Moore, Bill Black, and the newly added drummer DJ Fontana. They were joined by session musicians Floyd Kramer and Chet Atkins, who added a fuller sound to their music. One of the songs recorded was Heartbreak Hotel, a haunting and unique ballad that would become Elvis's first single. Despite the promising results, RCA officials in New York were still skeptical, leading to a second session in New York later that month. Elvis's television debut on stage show on January 28th was a pivotal moment. His performance of Shake, Rattle, and Roll and Flip, Flop, and Fly was energetic and shocking, but it didn't immediately capture the attention of the national audience. However, his subsequent appearances on the show, including his performance of Heartbreak Hotel, gradually built his reputation. By March, Heartbreak Hotel had entered the pop charts and reached No. 1 by mid-April, much to the relief of RCA and his manager, Colonel Tom Parker. Elvis's first RCA album, released in late March, also quickly rose to No. 1. His growing popularity led to increased demand for his records and television appearances. Parker, recognizing the importance of media relations, ensured that Elvis was always well prepared for interviews. Offstage, Elvis was modest and well-mannered, which helped to balance his wild and sensual stage persona. This dual image was crucial in maintaining his appeal to a broad audience. The Presley family's life changed dramatically as Elvis's success grew. They moved from a small rental to a larger home, and in May 1956, purchased a large 5-bedroom ranch house in an affluent neighborhood. Elvis's parents, Vernon and Gladys, were thrilled by their newfound comfort. Vernon managed the family's finances, while Gladys focused on running the household and documenting Elvis's achievements in scrapbooks. However, Elvis's success also meant he spent less time at home. He continued to tour extensively, performing in large venues and attracting huge, hysterical crowds. The tours were meticulously organized by Parker, who controlled every detail, from the opening acts to the color of the publicity posters. Despite the increased revenue, Parker kept the band's salaries low, emphasizing their relationship with Elvis as their primary value. Parker's efforts to secure Elvis a film career began to pay off when the producer Hal Wallis, impressed by Elvis's stage presence, agreed to bring him to Hollywood for a screen test. Elvis performed well, especially when lip-syncing and dancing to Blue Suede Shoes. Wallis saw Elvis's potential as a movie star and signed him to a one-picture deal with Paramount, with options for up to 6 more films. This strategic move by Parker ensured that Elvis would remain a sought-after commodity in the film industry, setting the stage for a successful and lucrative career in Hollywood. Elvis Presley's first Las Vegas engagement was a turning point, though not in the way Parker had hoped. The New Frontier Hotel engagement, starting at the end of April, was designed to see how Elvis would perform in front of an older, wealthier crowd. Despite the band's nervousness, Elvis tried to connect with the audience, adding self-deprecating humor between songs. However, the engagement was a disaster. Most of the patrons were more interested in gambling, and those who did pay attention were shocked by the noise coming from the stage. But there was a silver lining. Elvis fell in love with Las Vegas. During the day, he and his cousin Gene Smith, who also joined as a roadie, spent hours at the pool, flirting with waitresses and showgirls. He met famous performers like Johnny Ray and Liberace, and watched as many shows as he could. One night, he caught Freddie Bell and the Bellboys performing Hound Dog, a song by Big Mama Thornton. Elvis thought it would fit perfectly in his act. When Elvis returned to Memphis, he told a reporter, "Man, I really like Vegas. I'm going back there the first chance I get." And he did. Las Vegas became one of his favorite places to unwind. Parker, capitalizing on Elvis's growing popularity, arranged for him to appear on Milton Berle's variety show, which was a huge hit. Elvis's first appearance, where he earned $3,000, coincided with his screen test in Hollywood. The show was broadcast from an aircraft carrier in San Diego, and it was a major success. Elvis and his band played Heartbreak Hotel and Blue Suede Shoes, and Elvis even appeared in a comedy sketch with Berle. This appearance boosted his national visibility and showed that he was becoming a more confident performer. The second appearance on Berle's show on June 5th was even more memorable. This time Elvis performed I Want You, I Need You, I Love You, and a fiery version of Hound Dog, complete with suggestive movements. The show was a hit, winning its time slot for the first time that season. However, the performance also drew fierce criticism. Television critics were harsh, calling his movements more suited to dives and bordellos than a network show. Critics also lambasted his singing, saying it was vulgar and unintelligible. The New York Times even claimed Presley had no discernible singing ability. The backlash didn't stop there. Politicians, clergymen, and newspaper columnists joined in, and older performers like Frank Sinatra added their voices. Sinatra, in a Time magazine article, called rock and roll phony and false, and its musicians cretinous goons, whose music inspired sideburn delinquents. This criticism reflected deeper anxieties about the rise of rock and roll, which was seen as a threat to traditional values and the middle-class ideal of togetherness. Rock and roll's critics weren't just concerned about the music's quality. They were worried about its influence on teenagers. For much of American history, young people identified with their families and local communities. But by the late 1940s, a new, more inclusive youth culture was emerging. High schools were grouping more teenagers together, and the post-war economic boom provided more opportunities for teens to earn money and assert their independence. This new youth culture celebrated pleasure and instant gratification, leading to conflicts with parents who were used to more traditional norms. The 1950s saw a rise in concerns about juvenile delinquency, a term that became a lightning rod for adults worried about the influence of mass culture on teenagers. The new youth culture, influenced by working-class teens, encouraged mingling across class, ethnic, and even racial lines. This was a significant shift, and middle-class parents were particularly concerned. They saw rock and roll as a dangerous conduit for this new, carefree ethos. When rock and roll began to appeal to a larger, more diverse audience, including middle-class teens and girls, the criticism intensified. Record labels tried to sanitize the music with covers by white artists, but this did little to reduce demand. Disc jockeys like Alan Freed continued to play the original versions, and the new, sweeter sound made the music even more popular among whites, creating a larger African-American presence on the pop charts. By 1956, artists like Chuck Berry, Fats Domino, and Little Richard were crossing over to the mainstream, and by 1957, they were appearing in package shows with black and white acts, playing to integrated audiences. The music was evolving, combining elements of R&B, doo-wop, country, swing, and tin pan alley pop, and it was designed to appeal to teenagers of all races. Elvis and rock and roll were changing the cultural landscape, and the controversy only made them more influential. Despite the criticism, Elvis's confidence grew, and he continued to push boundaries, becoming a symbol of the new, rebellious youth culture. The arrival of rock and roll in the 1950s was more than just a new genre of music. It was a cultural earthquake that shook the foundations of American society. At the heart of this revolution was Elvis Presley, a young man from the South who became a symbol of everything that adults feared and teenagers loved. Elvis was more than just a singer. He was a representation of the new youth culture, one that was deeply influenced by African American music and the working-class values of the urban black community. For many middle-class Americans, this was a terrifying shift. The middle class had long associated African Americans, especially the urban black working class, with a lifestyle that they saw as chaotic and dangerous. This group, often marginalized and discriminated against, had developed a subculture that revolved around nightlife, alcohol, and sexual freedom. It was from this subculture that rhythm and blues emerged, a genre that would eventually give birth to rock and roll. Even though the vast majority of rock and roll artists, both black and white, only hinted at these earthy pleasures, it was enough to stir deep anxieties in many adults. They feared that the music would lead to moral decay, racial mixing, and the erosion of white supremacy, especially in the South, where the civil rights movement was gaining momentum. These fears were compounded by the changing sexual norms of the time. Since the 1920s, American culture had become increasingly sexualized, with advertisers using titillating imagery to sell products. By the mid-1950s, this trend had spread throughout popular culture, reflecting real changes in sexual behavior. Rates of premarital and non-marital sex had risen, and teenage pregnancy, particularly among middle-class whites, was on the rise. The Kinsey reports, published in 1948 and 1953, confirmed that many Americans were breaking away from traditional values of sexual self-control. This shift was further fueled by post-war affluence, the self-indulgent ethos of consumerism, and the constant threat of nuclear war, which made many people seek immediate pleasure. However, not everyone was embracing this new, more permissive culture. Religious conservatives, led by figures like Charles Keating, organized boycotts and pressure groups to fight what they saw as the moral decay of society. Their focus on the impact of sexualized popular culture on young people won them support from many middle-class Americans who were ambivalent about their own indulgences. These protests and boycotts drew the attention of politicians and civic leaders, who were forced to take action. Elvis Presley, with his raw energy and working-class roots, became the perfect target for these fears. He was a poorly educated former truck driver who had risen to fame through his music, which was heavily influenced by African American rhythms and blues. His lack of interest in literature, current events, and the trappings of middle-class respectability made him a symbol of everything that conservatives detested. His Southern roots only added to the contempt he faced, as the South was often viewed by Northerners and the media elite as a cultural backwater. Elvis's performance style, which included his famous pelvic gyrations, was particularly alarming. His movements were seen as overtly sexual and a direct challenge to the culture of reticence that many adults still valued. When he appeared on national television shows, his performances were met with both enthusiasm and outrage. The more he was criticized, the more teenagers rallied around him, seeing him as a hero of the new youth culture. Being an Elvis fan became a way for young people to assert their independence from their parents. Elvis himself was bewildered by the criticism. He saw himself as just a musician, drawing on the music he loved and responding to the demands of his audience. He defended his fans, insisting that they were decent kids who just wanted to have fun. He argued that his movements were natural, and that he was simply expressing himself through the music. But for many adults, his very presence on the stage was a threat to the status quo. Colonel Tom Parker, Elvis's manager, saw the controversy as an opportunity. While the criticism was unfair, it also made Elvis the most talked-about performer of the time. Parker used this to his advantage, negotiating high-profile appearances that further cemented Elvis's stardom. When Ed Sullivan, who had previously vowed never to have Elvis on his show, changed his mind, it was a clear sign that Elvis had become a cultural phenomenon. The Colonel ensured that Elvis had complete control over his performances, a condition that Sullivan had to accept. By the end of 1956, Elvis was not just a star. He was a cultural icon. His records were selling in unprecedented numbers, and his influence was felt across the country. The more he was criticized, the more his popularity grew, and the more he became a symbol of the new, rebellious youth culture. For Elvis, it was a whirlwind of success and controversy, but for many teenagers, he was a hero who embodied their desire for freedom and change. Elvis Presley's first big TV appearance was on September 9, 1956, on The Ed Sullivan Show. However, Ed Sullivan wasn't there that night. Instead, the actor Charles Laughton introduced Elvis. Elvis performed some of his biggest hits like Don't Be Cruel, Hound Dog, and Love Me Tender, as well as Little Richard's Ready Teddy. At first, Elvis was a bit nervous, but as he got into his set, he became more confident and started to rock out. When he moved away from the microphone during Ready Teddy, the camera missed his famous leg movements, but the studio audience, filled with excited teenagers, went wild. The show was a huge hit, with over 80% of the TV watching public tuning in, and it became one of the most talked about moments in television history. Elvis's next TV appearance on October 28th was just before his first movie was released. He sang the movie's title song, reminding everyone to go see it. His performance was full of energy, and he seemed even more confident than before. The third appearance in early January was his best yet. Dressed in a gold lame vest, Elvis performed a mix of songs, from rock and roll to a touching gospel song called Peace in the Valley. To avoid controversy, the TV crew only showed Elvis from the waist up during the upbeat songs. At the end of the show, Ed Sullivan praised Elvis, calling him a decent, fine boy. Elvis's success on TV helped his manager, Colonel Tom Parker, demand higher fees for future appearances. Elvis had already made $50,000 for the 3 Sullivan shows, but Parker told the networks they'd need to pay $300,000 for Elvis to appear again, and they'd have to give him his own one-hour special. The networks weren't willing to pay that much, and Parker was fine with that. He wanted to focus on Elvis's movie career, believing that too many TV appearances could make Elvis less special. In July 1956, Parker also signed a deal to sell Elvis merchandise, like charm bracelets, lockets, and even record players. These items became very popular and made a lot of money. Parker used this merchandise to help start fan clubs, which quickly spread across the country. These fan clubs were a way for Parker to keep fans excited about Elvis and to promote his music and movies. The fans were eager to support Elvis, and they often defended him when people criticized him. Despite his rock and roll image, Elvis wasn't just a one-trick pony. He was actually very versatile and could sing different styles of music. He even said he liked singing ballads like Eddie Fisher and Perry Como. In his first editions, Elvis had only sung ballads, but Sam Phillips, who discovered him, encouraged him to explore rhythm and blues. When Elvis signed with RCA, he recorded more rock and roll songs, but he also included ballads and other styles. When Elvis started making movies in 1956, his music became even more diverse. His first movie, Love Me Tender, had a soundtrack with folk-inspired songs, and his later movies had a mix of rock and roll, ballads, and pop tunes. This variety helped him stay popular with different audiences. His records continued to sell well throughout the 1950s, with songs like All Shook Up and Jailhouse Rock hitting the top of the charts. Even when Elvis was in the Army, his music remained popular. Elvis's success wasn't just about his looks or his stage presence. He was a talented musician. He could play guitar, piano, and even the electric bass. He impressed the studio musicians and songwriters he worked with, including Jerry Leiber and Mike Stoller, who had initially been skeptical of him. Elvis's recordings with RCA were polished but still powerful, and he had a unique sound that made his music instantly recognizable. Colonel Parker played a big role in Elvis's success by letting him handle the musical side of things. Parker didn't interfere with Elvis's recording sessions and trusted Elvis's musical instincts. This trust helped Elvis grow as an artist and develop his own style. Elvis and Parker had a clear division of roles. Parker handled the business, and Elvis handled the music. Elvis's success on TV and in music opened the door for him to try his luck in Hollywood. But the question remained, what kind of movie star would he become, and could he maintain his music career while pursuing acting? Elvis Presley's rise to fame was like a roller coaster. It brought him incredible success, but it also came with a big price tag. In July 1956, before he even made his first Hollywood film, Elvis took a vacation to Biloxi, Mississippi, to visit a young woman he had been seeing. He was tired after months of touring, TV appearances, and recording sessions. But his break from the spotlight didn't last long. Within hours of arriving, the news spread that Elvis Presley was in town. A large crowd gathered in the courtyard of his hotel, and his white Cadillac convertible was covered with notes, addresses, and phone numbers, some even written in lipstick or scratched into the car's paint. This was just a taste of what was to come. Elvis's fame quickly grew, and he became a national icon. Being recognized everywhere he went meant he had to change his daily life. He was no longer just the Elvis from Memphis. He was now a celebrity, and that brought new pressures. While he loved the attention and adoration from his fans, he also found it overwhelming. He often went out of his way to chat with fans, sign autographs, and show his appreciation. He felt deeply connected to them, and he couldn't understand why some stars resented their fans. For Elvis, success meant pleasing his fans, and he took that responsibility seriously. Elvis also enjoyed the attention from young women. He had a steady girl friend most of the time, but he often fooled around on the road. His friends, like George Klein, would help him find women who were Elvis's type. He was careful to avoid any trouble, but he also loved the intimacy and companionship. When he brought a girlfriend home to meet his parents, it meant something special. June Juanico, a young woman from Biloxi, became his most serious relationship. They had known each other since 1955, and they reconnected in Memphis in 1956. They spent a lot of time together, and rumors spread that they were engaged. But Elvis's manager, Colonel Parker, was against the idea. Parker believed that if Elvis got serious about any woman, it would hurt his appeal to teenage girls, his most loyal fan. So Elvis and June drifted apart, and he moved on to other relationships. Despite the fame, Elvis found that his life was becoming more complicated. He couldn't go anywhere without attracting a crowd. Even in Memphis, he needed police escorts to get through events. Going to the movies, eating at restaurants, or attending public gatherings turned into chaotic scenes. Once at a gas station, a crowd formed, and the manager got angry and hit Elvis. A fight broke out, and the police had to intervene. Elvis complained to the press, saying, "It's getting where I can't even leave the house without something happening to me." Elvis's neighbors on Audubon Drive also started to complain about the crowds. The situation became so bad that some neighbors offered to buy the Presleys' home to get rid of the fuss. Elvis and his parents decided it was time to move. They found a beautiful estate called Graceland, about 8 miles south of Memphis. The house was perfect, and they bought it for $102,500. Elvis was thrilled and began making plans to decorate it. He wanted it to be even nicer than the homes of Hollywood stars. He added a soda fountain and a jukebox to the basement, and his mother's kitchen was filled with the latest appliances. Outside, they built a chicken house and a vegetable garden, but they also added a swimming pool and fancy gates. Graceland was a mix of old and new, reflecting Elvis's roots and his new lifestyle. For Elvis, Graceland was more than just a house. It was a symbol of his success and a place where he could finally feel at home, away from the chaos of fame. But the challenges of celebrity were just beginning, and they would shape the rest of his life. Elvis and his family settled into Graceland, the mansion that symbolized his success. The estate's walls and gates, guarded by relatives, provided a much-needed sanctuary from the chaos outside. Inside, life seemed to go on as it had on Audubon Drive. Gladys tended her vegetable garden and chickens, while Vernon managed the family's finances. Family and friends often gathered, and Elvis spent his time entertaining his closest friends, like George Klein, Red West, and Anita Wood, whom he began dating in the summer of 1957. New friends, including Cliff Gleaves, Lamar Fike, and Alan Fortas, also joined the mix. They were young men around Elvis's age, eager to be part of his world, and often torn between their own lives and the allure of hanging out with a superstar. Despite the constant presence of his friends, Graceland remained a family-oriented home. They watched TV, sang spirituals around the baby grand piano, and enjoyed each other's company. Alan Fortas noted, "It never got wild at Graceland, largely because of Gladys, who kept Elvis grounded and emotionally connected to his roots. However, Elvis's career demands were intense. Recording, touring, and making movies in Hollywood left little time for Graceland. When he was home, he often stayed up all night, a habit he developed from his performances. This nocturnal lifestyle helped him avoid the crowds and chaos that often followed him during the day. Business owners and entertainment venues were happy to cater to his late-night whims, opening their doors for exclusive shopping sprees, private movie screenings, and late-night amusement park rides. Elvis's inner circle grew, and these friends became a constant presence in his life. They were there for him, especially when he felt insecure in Hollywood. In their company, Elvis sometimes exhibited macho behavior, which was different from the thoughtful and sensitive person he was with his girlfriends. His friends, eager to stay in his good graces, often became sycophantic, afraid to challenge him. This dynamic sometimes led to Elvis being rude or possessive, but he also tried to set a good example by discouraging swearing and avoiding alcohol. Gladys, despite her pride in her son's success, struggled with his absences and the toll his fame took on him. She often drank heavily and spent long hours in the kitchen, worrying about Elvis's health and well-being. Friends noted that her concern for Elvis drove her to drink, and some believed it contributed to her declining health. Elvis, too, had moments of doubt. The pressure of fame, the hostile press, and the constant scrutiny made him feel isolated and miserable. During a visit to church, he confided to the minister, "I've got more money than I can spend. I have thousands of fans and lots of people who call themselves my friends, but I am miserable." The weight of responsibility as a provider for his family and friends sometimes felt overwhelming. When his old friend Dixie saw him in 1958, he expressed a desire to walk away from it all, but felt it was too late to turn back. Despite the challenges, Elvis's career continued to soar. He toured extensively, playing in big cities across the country and even in Canada, the Pacific Northwest, and Hawaii. The tours were marked by controversy, with fans rioting and civic officials banning his performances. In Vancouver, the chaos was so intense that Elvis had to be rushed offstage for his safety. The Catholic Church also condemned him, and some fans even threw eggs at him during concerts. In late October 1957, Elvis performed at the Pan Pacific Auditorium in Los Angeles, where the press and some celebrities criticized his performance. The Los Angeles Vice Squad threatened to take action, and Elvis was more restrained at subsequent shows. This experience, combined with the ongoing tension and criticism, led Colonel Parker to limit Elvis's live appearances, focusing instead on his film career. Elvis's success in Hollywood was evident with his first film, Love Me Tender, which was a hit. He followed it with Loving You, a fictionalized account of his rise to fame. His performance in Loving You showed significant improvement, and the film was a box office success. Vernon and Gladys even visited the set, appearing in the audience during one of the musical scenes. Elvis loved Hollywood and thrived in the film industry. He made new friends, including Nick Adams and Natalie Wood, and enjoyed the glamour and excitement of the movie world. Despite the challenges and pressures, Graceland remained a place of solace and family, a reminder of where he came from and the values that kept him grounded.